A businessman likes to visit sages who ever entered their village. One day, a great sage visited his village. The businessman visited the sage and asked him to give a few pieces of advice about life. The sage replied, "Look, my dear, if I give you any advice for free, you will definitely forget about them, and there is no use for me to give you any advice. So why bother?" The businessman didn't give up. He continued to request the sage's advice. The sage finally agreed on one condition: each piece of advice would cost $100. The businessman checked his pockets. He had $400, so he immediately agreed. Then the sage gave his first advice. If you ever see a person who is lower than you suddenly become rich or powerful, respect him as per his current position. Don't make fun of him just because he was lower than you previously. The businessman found it useful and was very happy with the advice. Then the businessman asked for another piece of advice since he still had $300 left. The sage told him, if you ever find a secret of someone, never be the first person to reveal that secret, no matter what. The businessman again liked the second advice and asked for another one. The sage told him, avoid the small works which can be done by servants or others. Let them do those works. You should focus on big events that require your attention. The businessman found this advice also helpful and asked for one last piece of advice. Then the sage told him, if you ever get hurt by the people you trust the most, or if your heart was broken, never stay in that place, not even for a minute. Move to another place immediately. The businessman was very happy to receive those pieces of advice from the sage, and left for his house with empty pockets. After a few days, the businessman lost all of his wealth and decided to move to another city so that he could find some work or start a new business. His loyal servant insisted on following his master. The businessman agreed because his servant was very loyal and helpful. The two reached a town and spent the night there. In the morning, the businessman sent his servant to buy breakfast for both of them. The servant took the money and went to buy breakfast. On the other hand, some royal guards were looking for the person who would enter the city gates to make that person their king. According to tradition, they had to choose a new king since the current king had no heir. They decided to make the first person to enter their city the king. The servant entered the city to buy breakfast, and the royal guards took him to their palace. The servant had no idea why the guards brought him to the palace. The guards made him king, and explained everything to him. The servant told the guards to look for his master because his master was waiting for him and was worried since the servant hadn't returned. The guards came to the place where they both spent the night, and explained to the master that they had taken the servant to the palace. When the master saw the servant on a royal throne, he immediately greeted the servant with, "Greetings, my dear Majesty." The servant was very happy that his master treated him like the king. Then the servant felt like a king because before he was unsure and hesitant, since he always thought he was the servant and not the king. Though he was his master's servant, when the master called him king and your majesty, the servant felt like a real king. This was the first advice that the master bought from the sage for $100. The servant who became the king asked his master to stay in the palace as his minister. The master agreed and became the minister, giving advice to the new king, his servant. After a few days passed, the whole kingdom was in peace and prosperity. One day, while the businessman was walking through the garden, he saw the queen having an affair with a security guard. He felt very uncomfortable and left the garden. At first, he wanted to tell the king about the queen's affair, but he suddenly remembered the second advice he bought from the sage, so he decided not to be the first person to reveal the queen's affair. The queen noticed the businessman and was afraid that he would reveal her secret to the king. So she came up with a plan to kill the businessman before he revealed her secret. She visited the king without notice, with a crying and devastated look. The king was shocked to see the queen in that state and asked her, "What happened? Who did this to you? My dear, whoever it is, I will make sure to sentence that person to death, no matter what." The queen started telling a false story that the businessman insulted her. The king was heartbroken and couldn't believe that his master did this to his wife. Since he had already given his word to the queen, he decided to kill the businessman. However, he wanted to save his master's dignity in front of his people, so he didn't openly sentence the businessman to death. Instead, he told his royal chef to kill the person who ever enters the kitchen wearing the king's necklace. On the other hand, the king summoned the businessman and told him that tomorrow was a special day, so he had told the royal chef to cook some special dish, and he couldn't trust anyone but the businessman to bring the recipe from the chef. He gave the businessman his necklace and said, "Wear this necklace and show it to the chef, then only he will give you the dish." The next day, a few soldiers informed the king that the queen was having an affair with some guards. The king guessed the truth and sentenced his wife and the guard to prison. Since it was already midday and late to save his master, he started crying loudly, realizing his mistake. But suddenly, he heard a voice asking, "What happened, your majesty? Why are you crying?" Hearing his master's voice, the king felt happy and grateful for his escape from death. Then the king explained everything to his master and asked for his forgiveness. The businessman started worrying and told the king that while he was going to visit the royal chef, the prince approached him and insisted on seeing the special dish. I remembered the third advice from the sage. Hence the prince, who is the king's son, took the necklace, and I told him to show it to the chef to get the recipe. The king rushed to the royal kitchen and saw his dead son on the floor. He took his son into his arms and cried, saying, "This is the punishment that God was supposed to give me, not you, my son." The next day, the businessman decided to leave the kingdom. The businessman was heartbroken because of the misery. He informed the king and leave the kingdom. There was a rich merchant who had 4 wives. He loved the 4th wife the most and adorned her with rich robes and treated her to delicacies. He took great care of her and gave her nothing but the best. He also loved the 3rd wife very much. He's very proud of her and always wanted to show off her to his friends. However, the merchant is always in great fear that she might run away with some other men. He too loved his 2nd wife. She is a very considerate person, always patient, and in fact is the merchant's confidant. Whenever the merchant faced some problems, he always turned to his 2nd wife, and she would always help him out and tide him through difficult times. Now, the merchant's 1st wife is a very loyal partner and has made great contributions in maintaining his wealth and business as well as taking care of the household. However, the merchant did not love the 1st wife, and although she loved him deeply, he hardly took notice of her. One day, the merchant fell ill. Before long, he knew that he was going to die soon. He thought of his luxurious life and told himself, "Now I have 4 wives with me. But when I die I'll be alone. How lonely I'll be." Thus he asked the 4th wife, "I loved you most, endowed you with the finest clothing and showered great care over you. Now that I'm dying, will you follow me and keep me company?" "No way," replied the 4th wife, and she walked away without another word. The answer cut like a sharp knife right into the merchant's heart. The sad merchant then asked the 3rd wife, "I have loved you so much for all my life. Now that I'm dying, will you follow me and keep me company?" "No," replied the 3rd wife. "Life is so good over here. I'm going to remarry when you die." The merchant's heart sank and turned cold. He then asked the 2nd wife, "I always turn to you for help and you've always helped me out. Now I need your help again. When I die, will you follow me and keep me company?" "I'm sorry, I can't help you out this time," replied the 2nd wife. "At the very most, I can only send you to your grave." The answer came like a bolt of thunder, and the merchant was devastated. Then a voice called out, "I'll leave with you. I'll follow you no matter where you go." The merchant looked up and there was his 1st wife. She was so skinny, almost like she suffered from malnutrition. Greatly grieved, the merchant said, "I should have taken much better care of you while I could have." Actually, we all have 4 wives in our lives, eh? The 4th wife is our body. No matter how much time and effort we lavish in making it look good, it'll leave us when we die. B. Our 3rd wife are possessions, status and wealth. When we die, they all go to others. C. The 2nd wife is our family and friends. No matter how close they had been there for us when we're alive, the furthest they can stay by us is up to the grave. D. The 1st wife is in fact our soul, often neglected in our pursuit of material, wealth and sensual pleasure. Guess what? It is actually the only thing that follows us wherever we go. Perhaps it's a good idea to cultivate and strengthen it now rather than to wait until we're on our deathbed to lament.
Story of overly smart students. One night 4 college students were out partying late night and didn't study for the test which was scheduled for the next day. In the morning, they thought of a plan. They made themselves look dirty with grease and dirt. Then they went to the dean and said they had gone out to a wedding last night and on their way back the tire of their car burst and they had to push the car all the way back. So, they were in no condition to take the test. The dean thought for a minute and said they can have the re-test after 3 days. They thanked him and said they will be ready by that time. On the 3rd day, they appeared before the dean. The dean said that as this was a special condition test, all 4 were required to sit in separate classrooms for the test. They all agreed as they had prepared well in the last 3 days. The test consisted of only 2 questions with the total of 100 points. First question, your name. Second question, which tire burst? Option A, front left. Option B, front right. Option C, back left. Option D, back right. The students realized their mistake and felt guilty. Moral of the story, take responsibility or you will learn your lesson.
Once upon a time, there was a farmer who felt like he had a lot of problems. He decided to go see the wise Buddha to get help. When the farmer met the Buddha, he told him about all his troubles. He talked about how sometimes there was too much rain and his crops got destroyed, and other times there was no rain at all and his crops couldn't grow. He also mentioned that he sometimes argued with his wife, his kids misbehaved, and he worried about money and the meaning of life. The farmer felt like he had so many problems and was looking for a solution. But the Buddha listened and said, "I can't make all your problems go away." The farmer was surprised and asked, "Then why did I come to you for help?" The Buddha explained, "Everyone has 83 problems, my friend. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's a part of life. Even if we solve one problem, another one might come up. Some problems, like losing loved ones or dealing with our own death, can't be fixed at all." The farmer felt frustrated. He asked, "So, what is the point of your teachings if you can't solve my problems?" The Buddha smiled and said, "Maybe I can help you with your 84th problem." The farmer was curious and asked, "What problem is that?" "It's the problem of wanting to have no problems at all," the Buddha replied. The farmer thought about it and realized that he always wanted his life to be free from any troubles. He understood that problems are a part of life and it's how we deal with them that matters. From that day on, the farmer learned to accept that everyone has problems, including himself. He understood that some problems can be solved, but new ones might come up. He decided to face his problems with a positive attitude and hope for the best. So, the farmer learned that it's not about getting rid of all problems, but about how we handle them. He chose to hold on to hope and face his problems with courage and a smile. And even though he still had problems, he felt lighter and happier because he knew he could handle them. And that is how the farmer learned that problems are a part of life, and instead of worrying too much, we can try to solve them and stay positive.
The Butterfly. A story of how your struggles develop your strengths. A man found a cocoon of a butterfly. One day a small opening appeared. He sat and watched the butterfly for several hours as it struggled to force its body through that little hole, until it suddenly stopped making any progress and looked like it was stuck. So the man decided to help the butterfly. He took a pair of scissors and snipped off the remaining bit of the cocoon. The butterfly then emerged easily, although it had a swollen body and small, shriveled wings. The man didn't think anything of it and sat there waiting for the wings to enlarge to support the butterfly. But that didn't happen. The butterfly spent the rest of its life unable to fly, crawling around with tiny wings and a swollen body. Despite the kind heart of the man, he didn't understand that the restricting cocoon and the struggle needed by the butterfly to get itself through the small opening were God's way of forcing fluid from the body of the butterfly into its wings, to prepare itself for flying once it was out of the cocoon. Moral of the story: our struggles in life develop our strengths. Without struggles, we never grow and never get stronger, so it's important for us to tackle challenges on our own, and not be relying on help from others. Control your temper. This story tells us the lasting impact of words spoken in anger. There once was a little boy who had a very bad temper. His father decided to hand him a bag of nails and said that every time the boy lost his temper, he had to hammer a nail into the fence. On the first day, the boy hammered 37 nails into that fence. The boy gradually began to control his temper over the next few weeks, and the number of nails he was hammering into the fence slowly decreased. He discovered it was easier to control his temper than to hammer those nails into the fence. Finally, the day came when the boy didn't lose his temper at all. He told his father the news, and the father suggested that the boy should now pull out a nail every day he kept his temper under control. The days passed and the young boy was finally able to tell his father that all the nails were gone. The father took his son by the hand and led him to the fence. "You have done well, my son. But look at the holes in the fence. The fence will never be the same. When you say things in anger, they leave a scar just like this one. You can put a knife in a man and draw it out. It won't matter how many times you say I'm sorry, the wound is still there." Moral of the story: control your anger, and don't say things to people in the heat of the moment that you may later regret. Some things in life, you are unable to take back. Thinking out of the box. A short story of creative thinking. In a small Italian town, hundreds of years ago, a small business owner owed a large sum of money to a loan shark. The loan shark was a very old, unattractive-looking guy that just so happened to fancy the business owner's daughter. He decided to offer the businessman a deal that would completely wipe out the debt he owed him. However, the catch was that we would only wipe out the debt if he could marry the businessman's daughter. Needless to say, this proposal was met with a look of disgust. The loan shark said that he would place 2 pebbles into a bag, one white and one black. The daughter would then have to reach into the bag and pick out a pebble. If it was black, the debt would be wiped, but the loan shark would then marry her. If it was white, the debt would also be wiped, but the daughter wouldn't have to marry the loan shark. Standing on a pebble-strewn path, in the businessman's garden, the loan shark bent over and picked up 2 pebbles. Whilst he was picking them up, the daughter noticed that he'd picked up 2 black pebbles and placed them both into the bag. He then asked the daughter to reach into the bag and pick one. The daughter naturally had 3 choices as to what she could have done. First, refuse to pick a pebble from the bag. Second, take both pebbles out of the bag and expose the loan shark for cheating. Third, pick a pebble from the bag fully well knowing it was black and sacrifice herself for her father's freedom. She drew out a pebble from the bag, and before looking at it accidentally dropped it into the midst of the other pebbles. She said to the loan shark, "Oh, how clumsy of me. Never mind, if you look into the bag for the one that is left, you will be able to tell which pebble I picked." The pebble left in the bag is obviously black, and seeing as the loan shark didn't want to be exposed, he had to play along as if the pebble the daughter dropped was white, and clear her father's debt. Moral of the story. It's always possible to overcome a tough situation through out-of-the-box thinking, and not give in to the only options you think you have to pick from. The elephant rope. A story of belief. A gentleman was walking through an elephant camp, and he spotted that the elephants weren't being kept in cages or held by the use of chains. All that was holding them back from escaping the camp was a small piece of rope tied to one of their legs. As the man gazed upon the elephants, he was completely confused as to why the elephants didn't just use their strength to break the rope and escape the camp. They could easily have done so, but instead, they didn't try to at all. Curious and wanting to know the answer, he asked a trainer nearby why the elephants were just standing there and never tried to escape. The trainer replied, "When they are very young and much smaller we use the same size rope to tie them, and, at that age, it's enough to hold them. As they grow up, they are conditioned to believe they cannot break away. They believe the rope can still hold them, so they never try to break free." The only reason that the elephants weren't breaking free and escaping from the camp was that over time they adopted the belief that it just wasn't possible. Moral of the story. No matter how much the world tries to hold you back, always continue with the belief that what you want to achieve is possible. Believing you can become successful is the most important step in actually achieving it. The obstacle in our path. The story about how to get an opportunity in life. In ancient times, a king had a boulder placed on a roadway. He then hid himself and watched to see if anyone would move the boulder out of the way. Some of the king's wealthiest merchants and courtiers came by and simply walked around it. Many people loudly blamed the king for not keeping the roads clear, but none of them did anything about getting the stone out of the way. A peasant then came along carrying a load of vegetables. Upon approaching the boulder, the peasant laid down his burden and tried to push the stone out of the road. After much pushing and straining, he finally succeeded. After the peasant went back to pick up his vegetables, he noticed a purse lying in the road where the boulder had been. The purse contained many gold coins and a note from the king, explaining that the gold was for the person who removed the boulder from the roadway. Moral of the story. Every obstacle we come across in life gives us an opportunity to improve our circumstances, and whilst the lazy complain, the others are creating opportunities through their kind hearts, generosity, and willingness to get things done. The struggles of our life story. Once upon a time a daughter complained to her father that her life was miserable and that she didn't know how she was going to make it. She was tired of fighting and struggling all the time. It seemed just as one problem was solved, another one soon followed. Since her father is a chef, he took her to the kitchen. He filled 3 pots with water and placed each on a high fire. Once the 3 pots began to boil, he placed potatoes in one pot, eggs in the second pot and ground coffee beans in the third pot. He then let them sit and boil, without saying a word to his daughter. The daughter moaned and impatiently waited, wondering what he was doing. After 20 minutes he turned off the burners. He took the potatoes out of the pot and placed them in a bowl. He pulled the eggs out and placed them in a bowl. He then ladled the coffee out and placed it in a cup. Turning to her, he asked, "Daughter, what do you see? Potatoes, eggs and coffee," she hastily replied. "Look closer," he said, and touched the potatoes. She did and noted that they were soft. He then asked her to take an egg and break it. After pulling off the shell, she observed the hard-boiled egg. Finally, he asked her to sip the coffee. Its rich aroma brought a smile to her face. "Father, what does this mean?" she asked. He then explained that the potatoes, the eggs and coffee beans had each faced the same adversity, the boiling water. However, each one reacted differently. The potato went in strong, hard and unrelenting, but in boiling water, it became soft and weak. The egg was fragile, with the thin outer shell protecting its liquid interior until it was put in the boiling water. Then the inside of the egg became hard. However, the ground coffee beans were unique. After they were exposed to the boiling water, they changed the water and created something new. "Which one are you?" he asked his daughter. "When adversity knocks on your door, how do you respond? Are you a potato, an egg, or a coffee bean?" Moral of the story: in life, things happen around us, things happen to us, but the only thing that truly matters is how you choose to react to it and what you make out of it. Life is all about leaning, adopting, and converting all the struggles that we experience into something positive. The same boiling water that softens the potato hardens the egg. The Golden Touch. A story of how the greed will always lead to downfall. There once was a king named Midas who did a good deed for a satyr. And he was then granted a wish by Dionysus, the god of wine. For his wish, Midas asked that whatever he touched would turn to gold. Despite Dionysus' efforts to prevent it, Midas pleaded that this was a fantastic wish, and so, it was bestowed. Excited about his newly earned powers, Midas started touching all kinds of things, turning each item into pure gold. But soon, Midas became hungry. As he picked up a piece of food, he found he couldn't eat it. It had turned to gold in his hand. Hungry Midas groaned. "I'll starve." Perhaps this was not such an excellent wish after all. Seeing his dismay, Midas' beloved daughter threw her arms around him to comfort him, and she, too, turned to gold. "The golden touch is no blessing," Midas cried. His heart heavy with regret, King Midas called out to Dionysus, begging for mercy and asking to be relieved of the golden touch. The god appeared once more, and with a gentle touch, he reversed the wish. Midas was relieved but profoundly humbled by the experience. As he walked through his golden palace, Midas came across his beloved daughter, Princess Marigold. Filled with joy at his newfound freedom from the cursed gift, he rushed to embrace her. The Group of Frogs is a story of encouragement and discouragement. As a group of frogs was traveling through the woods, two of them fell into a deep pit. When the other frogs crowded around the pit and saw how deep it was, they told the two frogs that there was no hope left for them. However, the two frogs decided to ignore what the others were saying and they proceeded to try and jump out of the pit. Despite their efforts, the group of frogs at the top of the pit were still saying that they should just give up, that they would never make it out. Eventually, one of the frogs took heed to what the others were saying and he gave up, falling down to his death. The other frog continued to jump as hard as he could. Again, the crowd of frogs yelled at him to stop the pain and give up. He jumped even harder and finally made it out. When he got out, the other frogs asked, "Did you not hear us?" The frog explained to them that he was deaf. He could not understand what they are saying. And the frog also thanked all the frogs for encouraging him the entire time. Otherwise he could not have made it up. Moral of the story. People's words can have a big effect on others' lives. Think about what you say before it comes out of your mouth. It might just be the difference between life and death.